Hi, I'm Kate. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to my very first video. So today we're going to be talking about the Bling Ring. The Bling Ring was a group of 7 people, mostly teenagers, in California who burglarized the homes of a number of celebrities for about a year until they were eventually caught. And the ringleader of the group that's usually said is the ringleader was named Rachel Lee. Rachel lived in Calabasas with her mother at the time of the burglaries, and she attended Calabasas High for a while, but was eventually expelled. Calabasas High School has quite a few sort of rich and/or celebrity alumni, including actresses Sherry Appleby, Katie Cassidy, Danielle Fishel, and Eric Menendez, one of the Menendez brothers, to name a few. And Lee has been described as being very obsessed with reality TV, and was also described as being very manipulative and controlling by the other person who is often named as the secondary ringleader, Nick Prugo. Nick Prugo, he was also expelled from Calabasas High School. They didn't apparently know each other at Calabasas High School, but they eventually both transferred to Indian Hills High School after they were expelled. And Indian Hills is sort of like an alternative school, so like they might not grade in the typical way, or they might have classes set up in a different way for people who don't learn any, traditional environment. And so altogether, 5 members of the Bling Ring attended Indian Hills High School. After becoming friends with Lee and her group, Nick Prugo started doing drugs and partying pretty heavily, and stealing from his parents to pay for it. The next member, and sometimes she's like really the most well-known for reasons we'll get into later, but the next member is Alexis Nears, and she was a friend of Lee's at Indian Hills. And she claims to have only been involved in one robbery, and initially denied being involved at all, but she was found with some of the stolen items in her house and was also recorded leaving the scene with some handbags, like purses. Diana Tamayo is the next member, and she was actually the student body president of Indian Hills, and she kind of seemed like she would have been set up for a good future, but she'd actually gotten into some fights before and had been caught participating in some petty theft with Rachel Lee in the past. One thing about her was that she was pretty small and apparently used that to her advantage in one of the burglaries by manipulating herself through the doggy door of one of the houses. Next was Courtney Ames, who also went to Calabasas High School, and she was also a friend of Lee's. And she sort of introduced the group to the remaining members, Johnny Ajar and Roy Lopez Jr., and she actually ended up dating one of them in kind of an inappropriate relationship, if you ask me, based on their ages. But Ajar isn't actually believed to have participated in any of the burglaries. At least there's no evidence that he did. He was never caught on camera at any of the scenes, but he sort of acted as a fence for the group. So they would sell some of the stuff to him for a relatively low price, and then he would try and sell it for much more, probably still less than it was actually worth. But that's the thing when you're selling stolen goods. And he is the one that actually dated Courtney Ames. And I mean, who can blame her? Really, what a hunk. But the last member is Roy Lopez Jr., and Lopez actually did participate in the group by selling stolen items, although he apparently wasn't very good at it. But he was also involved in at least one of the burglaries, so we'll get into that a little later as well. So those are our main players. So now let's get into the actual events. The first burglary apparently happened in the summer after Prugo and Lee were in the 10th grade. So they were probably around like 16 at the time for non-Americans out there. And they burgled the house of someone they knew, supposedly. And they knew this person wasn't going to be in town. And Prugo claims to have been pushed into doing the robbery by Lee because he didn't want to lose her as a friend. That kind of was his excuse for all of the illegal activity that he participated in, which, I mean, it could be true to some extent, but at a certain point, when you get tricked into doing drugs a lot and stealing from your family, from your friends, from very high-profile individuals, at a certain point, you still are responsible for your actions, but we'll get into that later again. And after that burglary, they started going around and like checking the doors of expensive cars to see if they were unlocked, and would take purses and wallets from the cars and use the credit cards to pay for big shopping sprees in expensive neighborhoods. Apparently no one ever questioned them about that, but they were already in this sort of practice of using stolen money to pay for a more extravagant lifestyle than they could really afford, particularly when it came to designer clothing. And at some point, members of the group started talking about burglarizing celebrity homes, and they decided to target someone who they thought would be an easy mark. And Prugo said that the questions that they asked themselves were, quote, who would leave a door unlocked? Who would leave a lot of money lying around? End quote. And they decided Paris Hilton would be the perfect answer to those questions. And I do kind of feel like I want to stick up for Paris Hilton, because I feel like she gets a worse rap, really, than she deserves. But they were right. So Rachel Lee and Nick Prugo made the initial trip to Paris's house at 2 o'clock in the morning, after going over to Google Earth satellite and going over images of her neighborhood to try and find a way in. It was, like one of those gated private neighborhoods. And they got in there by climbing up a hill. And when they got to her house, they rang the doorbell, and no one answered. So they looked under the doormat and found a key. Don't leave a key under your doormat. It's very unsafe. And it's pretty much the first place someone's going to look if they're trying to break in. But it turns out they didn't even need the key, because the door was unlocked. So on this initial trip anyway, Prugo says he acted as sort of a lookout near the front door in case someone came back, while Lee went upstairs and stole a bunch of clothes and jewelry, and they came back at least 5 times. Again, stole a lot of clothes, including underwear. They stole a lot of jewelry. They stole money. They took out private photographs that, again, were in an unlocked safe. And they also apparently stole some special white powder. Take from that what you will. They even did some of this white powder in the house. And according to Courtney Ames, Prugo even found out that Paris's shoes fit him and did a little dance in them, although Prugo denies that this happened, or that he ever even tried them on. And all through these multiple burglaries, Paris apparently didn't notice that anyone was coming into her house and stealing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of items. I guess she had just so much stuff that she didn't notice. This was multiple items, money, white powder. It seems a little odd to me that she didn't notice for quite some time. It was only when Lopez, in his only confirmed participation in an actual burglary, stole almost $2 million of stuff in one day, mostly jewelry, did Paris realize that something was going on. And after that, she reported to the police. The burglary made the news, and the group knew that they had to move on to other targets. That cash cow had paid out. So they tracked celebrities online. They would find out where they lived. They would study satellite photographs of the homes and the neighborhoods to figure out how to best get in there. They would track celebrity social media to find out, when they might be out of town working or on vacation or at events. They would study pictures of celebrities to figure out what items they might want to steal. They planned this pretty well, and it was kind of ingenious in a way, really, but it still kind of surprising they got away with it as long as they did. So the ring entered the home of reality TV star Audrina Patridge on February 22nd, 2009, which was the night of the Academy Awards ceremony, and they knew that she would be at parties all night and therefore not be at home. And once again, they entered the house through an unlocked door. They stole around $40,000 worth of items, including jewelry, and her laptop and passport, which seemed like not the smartest items to steal because you probably noticed those were missing, especially the laptop, pretty quickly. It was probably they were hoping to get maybe private photos or personal information from the laptop, but still, most people would notice if their laptop went missing. And unlike Paris, Audrina immediately noticed that someone had been in her house and had taken stuff, and she contacted the police and posted the surveillance footage that she had of the burglary on her website. And this recording actually included footage of Lee and Prugo, but no one really could identify them based on that footage, and it didn't lead to any arrests. The OC actress Rachel Bilson was the group's next target, and they burglarized her home several times between April and May of 2009. They stole so many accessories and pieces of clothing, actually, that they sold some of it on the Venice Beach boardwalk and made a few $1,000 just from that. Altogether, it's estimated they stole around $130,000 to $300,000 of stuff from her house. And at this point, the group was starting to get a little too comfortable and sure of themselves. And Lee even used Bilson's bathroom during one of their visits. But on May 9th of 2009, Bilson's mother was the one who actually realized that someone had been breaking into her daughter's home and reported it. Again, it made the news, obviously, and the ring moved on once again. On July 13th, they chose to target Orlando Bloom's house. And Lee picked him because she wanted to steal some lingerie from Bloom's then-girlfriend and eventual ex-wife, Miranda Kerr, who was a Victoria's Secret model. And they got into the property by cutting through a security fence. And again, they stole a bunch of designer clothing, including lingerie, which, again, it's creepy that someone is stealing your underwear and wearing it. But they also then stole Bloom's vintage Rolex collection, which is a thing you have. And about $500,000 worth of stuff was taken on this one trip. And this is the only confirmed burglary that Nears was present for. And we know that because she was actually caught on the security footage carrying some bags, some handbags out of the house. But she claims that she was so under the influence that she didn't even realize what was going on. I would wonder why some people who were trying to break into a house would take their very inebriated friend with them. And considering she was eventually found with some of the items in her home, but apparently she says she was so out of it and sick that she went outside and vomited and relieved herself in some bushes. So there's a fun fact. And again, they were getting very comfortable with themselves. Lee even took some art off of the wall because she was going to be moving to live with her father shortly in Las Vegas and wanted something to put up on the wall in her new room. Next, the ring broke into the home of Brian Austin Green and Megan Fox because Lee liked Fox's style. In addition to clothes, they also took Green's handgun, which, again, one of those items that you might notice as missing pretty quickly, but this gun was actually eventually found in the possession of Ajar, so it's unclear whether he maybe participated in this burglary and took it for himself, or whether it was given to him later, either as a gift or to sell for money. And if the group had stopped here, it's quite possible they wouldn't have been caught, but they just couldn't stop. For the most part, they were using the burglaries for two purposes. One, a lot of the girls liked designer clothing. They wanted all of these designer shoes and jewelry and lingerie and jeans and everything, and they couldn't really afford those. And secondly, they needed money for drugs. And that's why a lot of the stuff that they got, they tried to sell, or if they found any cash lying around, which apparently they often did, they snatched it up, and of course, if they found any little treats in people's houses, they also took that. They just couldn't stop. And especially for Lee, there was one target that was her dream mark. And this was the one that would ultimately take her and the whole ring down. Lindsay Lohan was Lee's ultimate fashion icon. And even though at this point Lee had already moved to live with her father in Las Vegas, she could not help coming back to participate in a burglary at Lindsay Lohan's house. On August 23rd, Lee Prugo and Diana Tamayo broke into Lohan's home. The house did have a security system, which supposedly had recently scared off another intruder, but it wasn't activated that night. The group stole around $130,000 worth of clothes and jewelry. And again, Lindsay Lohan actually immediately noticed that someone had broken into her house and contacted the authorities. This wasn't really the best period of time in Lindsay Lohan's life. I don't know if anyone remembers 2009 and what was going on with her at that point. Having someone break into her home and steal a bunch of her stuff was probably just the icing on the cake at that point. She had surveillance footage of the burglary and turned it over to the police. And with this security footage and the security footage from the burglary at Audrina Patridge's house, they realized that some of the same people seemed to be showing up on it and realized that there was a connection. They definitely suspected at this point that there might be a connection between some of these burglaries, but they didn't really have a lot of evidence to that point. But now they had multiple videos showing probably the same people, although at that point they still couldn't really identify them. However, that didn't last long because an anonymous tipster told the police that Lee and Prugo were the ones responsible for the Lindsay Lohan burglary. And this is possibly at least in part because they were bragging about it. They were bragging about participating in these burglaries at celebrities' homes. And it really is honestly surprising that they weren't caught sooner. They did try and hide their identities whenever they thought they might be on camera by putting their hoods up on their hoodie sweatshirts. They're even holding a shirt over their head when they were going in and out. But Prugo's face still did appear on the footage from the Lindsay Lohan burglary. And with the anonymous tipster, they were able to go and arrest Prugo. And then through his Facebook friends, they were able to determine that he was friends with Lee. And that was just more of a connection that put him at the scene of these burglaries. At first, he did try and deny any involvement, which most people do when they're caught for a crime, but it really didn't take long for him to break. And I think I mentioned earlier that he felt kind of peer pressured into participating in a lot of stuff, and he really did press that again. He said that he was so stressed out about the crimes that he couldn't eat or sleep, and that it was making his hair fall out, but he felt like if he didn't, then he would lose all of his friends. That seemed to be his only real excuse, considering most of the stuff that they stole was women's clothing and jewelry. It doesn't seem like he was necessarily taking any of that for himself, although he does claim to have had a pretty bad drug habit at this point and needed the money to sustain it. And he ended up confessing not only to the Lindsay Lohan burglary, but crimes that the police didn't even know about, way more than they even suspected him of. And he did this without even trying to make a deal with the police. And he also went ahead and threw everyone else under the bus as well. He just fessed up to everything, and even said that the group was still active and researching new targets, which mostly included basically every Disney TV star at the time. And a little while after he spilled beans, Lee, Tamayo, Nears, Ames, and Lopez were all arrested too. Lee was arrested at her father's home in Las Vegas and was still sort of trying to manipulate the situation, asking hypothetical questions. Apparently she thought that she'd gotten rid of everything that might have connected her to the burglaries, but they still found a coat that belonged to Lindsay Lohan as well as the intimate photos of Paris Hilton. In addition, they found more than $20,000 in cash and a decent amount of the wacky tobacco. And when she was confronted with these items, Lee sort of had a breakdown, or at least a pretend one. She freaked out and pretended to be sick, like acted like she was going to throw up, but couldn't because she didn't actually need to throw up, and basically was just trying to, again, I think, manipulate the police officers. Although some people have said that she might not have actually had a very high IQ, and that they didn't think that she was necessarily capable of being the ringleader of this group. It does seem like there's a lot of instances and reports of her being manipulative. So I don't know her personally, obviously, and she was young when this happened, but it does make it kind of hard to feel sorry for her. Still, everyone is a lot more grown up now, but let's finish with our lovely suspects. Ajar was also arrested, and he had the gun from Brian Austin Green's house, as well as again, quite a large amount of drugs, and a computer which had a bunch of aerial photos of houses in the Hollywood Hills. So again, they were still clearly continuing to plan for further burglaries. And Alexis Nears was actually arrested during the filming, or shortly after the filming, of a reality TV show that she was doing with her family. Her mom was a former Playboy playmate, I think. This show was crazy, guys. I can't even describe some of it, but we'll show a clip in a little while. She initially denied being involved or even having knowledge of the burglaries, which Brugo denied. But again, she had some of the stuff from the burglaries, so if she didn't even know about them, one would have to wonder where she thought it came from. She eventually gave in when she learned that Orlando Bloom was willing to testify against her in court, and pleaded no contest. I don't know if she was afraid of being confronted by him in person, or if she just thought she might get a worse sentence if he testified and she was sentenced based on that. But either way, she agreed to plead no contest to residential burglary. She was also found with a handbag belonging to Rachel Bilson and a necklace belonging to Lohan. While in jail for a short period of time, she was actually in a cell not too far from Lindsay Lohan, because Lindsay Lohan had some legal problems, I think I mentioned upon earlier. But apparently they didn't ever interact. So Nears was arrested on the set of Pretty Wild, reality TV show, during the taping of the first episode. And the show was based upon the lives of her family, including her mother, Andrea Arlington, who was a former Playboy model, as I said. And as a result of her arrest, the show ended up focusing a lot more on that, and it wasn't renewed for a second season, but the behavior of the family on the show was at times bizarre, including a scene which had Alexis basically having a meltdown when a Vanity Fair article about the burglaries incorrectly described the shoes that she was wearing to her arraignment or to court. And so here's a little clip from that. Rachel Lee, who again was sort of the alleged leader of the group, got the heaviest sentence. She pleaded no contest to the Audrina Patridge burglary and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, although she only ended up serving 1 year and 4 months before being paroled. Some of the members didn't even get jail time at all. Diana Tamayo actually only confessed after police threatened her family with deportation. They were not necessarily all in the country legally, so they basically threatened her. It does seem like she was involved in the burglaries, but that's still a really crappy thing to do, especially to someone who is pretty young. She was only sentenced to 3 years of probation and 60 days of community service. Courtney Ames was also sentenced to the same amount of probation and community service. This was after some charges were dismissed because the main investigator on the case, Brett Goodkin, he appeared in the movie that they made about this case, The Bling Ring, with Emma Watson. He appeared in it and acted as a consultant for the film. He appeared as himself, and this was determined to be an ethics violation. Like the cases hadn't been finalized yet, like they were still ongoing, and so they determined that this was not necessarily the behavior that was appropriate for this time in the case, and a lot of the charges against Courtney Ames, at least, were dismissed, and that is why she only got probation and community service. So, as I said, there was a movie by Sofia Coppola. There was also a TV movie about the group that came out in 2011, but the more famous movie is the Sofia Coppola movie, which came out in 2013, and it wasn't necessarily super factually accurate, and it sort of focused more on Emma Watson's character, who was based on the Alexis Nears character. It was based on her, but again, it wasn't necessarily super accurate. But because that reality TV show got a lot of attention, it seemed like more of the focus was actually on her, not on the people who were more involved in the burglaries. And Paris Hilton actually appeared as herself in the movie and even allowed them to shoot on location in her house. The Sofia Coppola movie is actually based more on the Vanity Fair article that I talked about earlier, and it was called The Suspects Wore Louboutins. It's worth a check out if you have the access to it. And most of the ring seems to have pretty much gotten their lives together since they finished up jail or probation. So, I mean, these kids were born in the early 90s, so they're 30 now. They're grown up, and most of them seem to have moved on with their lives. Alexis Nears is probably the one that there's most information about, mostly because she participated in a Vice article. I'll link it down below. It's really quite interesting. I really recommend you check it out if you're interested. But it kind of goes through her experience and what she's gone through afterwards. And she briefly went back into prison for possession not too long after she got out, after serving her 30-day sentence. And she ended up going to a rehabilitation center that was a luxury rehabilitation center. It was offered a year there free by the owner, which is pretty lucky. But apparently ever since then she's been sober and is apparently now a certified drug and alcohol counselor, which is pretty great. She's married, she has a couple of kids. It seems like everyone else has, a lot of them have gone to college and ended up, pursuing something a little bit more legal. And something that maybe helps the world a little bit, which is great. But that's it. That's the story. That's the Bling Ring. I am glad to see anyone who watches this, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.